Hey everyone, welcome back to the YouTube channel, and my name is Furkan Dandia. Today I'm going to talk about another reflection that I did recently on my Substack. It's titled Drawn to the Shadow: What the Masculinity Crisis is Really Showing Us. So the reason why I wanted to talk about this was diving into a lot of the work I've been doing in the past year, but also reflecting on how I've evolved in my thinking and how different ideas have come to me over the years. So a few years ago, when I started the Substack, I wrote a piece comparing Jordan Peterson and Andrew Tate. At that point, I had gained genuine insight from Peterson's work, but I was also growing frustrated by his reluctance to speak with conviction about his faith. Tate, by contrast, had recently embraced Islam at that time, and he seemed full of certainty. In hindsight, I believe both obscured more than they revealed. Over time, I came to see their public platforms as becoming increasingly oriented toward influence and personal prominence rather than the pursuit of truth. That is, of course, my interpretation, and only God truly knows what's in their hearts. But what I've come to understand is that people can sincerely believe they are making a difference while unknowingly serving someone else's agenda. That's the classic useful idiot concept. The sincerity of the belief doesn't make the harm any less real, nor does it absolve those who exploit it. So I was not immune. I fell for their words. I praised both of them at different times for different reasons. And looking back, I realized I was often captivated by certainty rather than the discernment needed. So how does this tie into the masculinity crisis so many people are talking about? The challenge is there isn't a shortage of voices offering solutions. It's that many people latch onto a figure and follow them without exercising discernment, just like myself. But before we can talk about solutions, it's important to understand and get a clear picture of the problem itself. So my goal in this reflection was to kind of use the framework developed by Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette in their book, King, Warrior, Magician, and Lover. And I've explored that in greater detail in another video. But the idea here was to examine how the shadow side of each masculine archetype manifests in the men our culture often elevates. So let's talk about the king. The king archetype represents order for himself and for others, and it's grounded in internal consistency and genuine authority. The mature king creates stability, nurtures growth, and takes responsibility for the well-being of those entrusted in his care. Its polarities are the tyrant or the weakling. The tyrant seeks control rather than stewardship. He projects strength while ruling through domination, fear, or self-preservation. The weakling is the opposite, a man who abdicates responsibility, avoids difficult decisions, and leaves a vacuum where leadership should really exist. So elements of the tyrant archetype can be seen in many contemporary leaders, but perhaps nowhere more visible than currently in Donald Trump. What makes his public leadership style more archetypically interesting is its oscillation between force and deal making, as we see that play out currently. At times, he has embraced rhetoric that emphasizes overwhelming military strength and decisive retaliation, while at other times presenting himself as the negotiator, capable of ending conflicts through diplomacy. A healthy king integrates strength and restraint in the service of justice. The tyrant, by contrast, risks making power itself the defining feature of leadership, leaving others uncertain whether decisions are ultimately guided by wisdom or by the projection of strength. So let's move on to the warrior. In his fullest expression, the warrior embodies disciplined action, courage, clear boundaries, and the capacity to act decisively. He is capable of aggression, but it is channeled, controlled by purpose rather than impulse. The warrior's shadow polarities are the sadist and the masochist. The sadist attacks, he dominates, he humiliates, he seeks strength through the degradation of others. The masochist, by contrast, turns his aggression inward, becoming passive, resentful, and unable to stand up for himself. So Andrew Tate's public persona reflects many characteristics of the warrior's shadow. What he's presenting as strength frequently appears as domination, provocation, and the pursuit of status rather than disciplined courage. From a psychological perspective, the sadist often attacks qualities he fears within himself, a dynamic Freud described as projection, where insecurity is displaced onto others. Then we have the magician. The magician represents cognition, awareness, wisdom, and the capacity for deep reflection. Through study, observation, and experience, he develops insight into himself, others, and the world around him. At his best, the magician seeks truth before ideology. He uses knowledge to eliminate rather than dominate. He remains intellectually curious and humble enough to revise his understanding when reality challenges his assumptions. The magician's shadow polarities are the detached manipulator and the denying innocent. The detached manipulator uses knowledge as a tool for personal influence rather than shared understanding. He becomes more comfortable analyzing life than participating in it. So at times, Jordan Peterson's public persona appears to reflect aspects of this shadow. When asked about his relationship with God, he has often responded with intricate philosophical formulations rather than direct personal testimony. Whether that's intentional or not, this can leave the impression of someone more comfortable inhabiting the architecture of ideas than the vulnerability of lived faith, which obviously lived faith requires a level of vulnerability. The denying innocent possesses enough knowledge to sound convincing, but lacks the humility to recognize the limits of his own understanding. He makes certainty for wisdom and analysis for genuine discernment. So Peterson's public response to Benjamin Netanyahu following October 7th, 2003, on Twitter, where he asked Netanyahu to go after Hamas, clearly illustrated this polarity. For a man who had built his reputation on careful thinking and moral seriousness, the tweet revealed a striking lack of wisdom and situational awareness, directly contradicting the very qualities he had long claimed to champion. It cost him significant credibility, and he has largely retreated from public life over the last year and a bit, whatever the stated reasons. The lover, which is the last archetype they talk about in the book, the lover engages life with passion, compassion, creativity, and sensory presence. He plays, he connects, he feels, and he experiences life deeply. His shadow polarities are the addicted lover and the impotent lover. So we have plenty of examples of that around us. We don't necessarily need to specifically talk about anyone, but the addicted lover cannot ground himself. He is perpetually restless, chasing pleasure, novelty, validation, and instant gratification. Often he is attempting to fill a deeper wound, frequently described as the mother wound, seeking through conquest and validation what was never securely received in our early life. The impotent lover is his mirror image, a man so wounded by disappointment, rejection, or betrayal that he withdraws from life altogether. He becomes disconnected from himself and others, drifting into boredom, depression, cynicism, and emotional numbness. Both forms are increasingly common in a culture that struggles to distinguish genuine intimacy from temporary gratification. So the purpose of this reflection is not to offer a simple solution. The masculinity crisis is far too complex for that. Rather, my hope is to sharpen our vision. Moore and Gillette's framework gives us a map for understanding what we are actually seeing when we look at the manner our culture celebrates, follows, and imitates. And what we are seeing more often than not are shadows. The danger is not simply that these men are flawed, because all men are. The danger is that we follow them precisely because their shadow expressions feel like strength. The tyrant looks like a leader, the sadist looks like a warrior, the manipulator looks like a sage. Perhaps this is why these figures become so influential. They externalize parts of the masculine psyche that many men have never fully integrated. A man who feels powerless gravitates towards the tyrant because he mistakes domination for authority. A man disconnected from healthy aggression admires the sadist because he mistakes cruelty for courage. And a man hungry for certainty follows the manipulator because he mistakes intelligence for wisdom. We are often drawn to the shadows we have not yet confronted within ourselves. The work then is not to eliminate the shadow, but to become conscious of it. We all carry these archetypes within us. The task is to cultivate their fullest expression, especially now in a culture that seems increasingly unsure what a good man actually looks like. The mature man does not need to dominate because he possesses genuine authority. He does not seek conflict because he has disciplined strength. He does not hide behind ideas because he has cultivated wisdom. He does not chase endless validation because he has learned to love deeply without becoming enslaved to desire. And perhaps this is where we must all begin, not by finding better leaders to follow, but by doing the harder work of becoming better than ourselves. I hope you enjoyed this reflection. As always, please subscribe or share.